we are doing Inside Hamlet with a lot of wonderful people. Casper and Cecilia is here as well, producing the thing, and a lot of excellent writers and collaborators in vast, nice, awesome crowd. Yes, I can. Designing Hamlet, sort of one of the design goals when we sat down and said we need a project, what should we do? I've been looking at Hamlet for years. I was not there. Of course, I would love to have been there, but I wasn't. And I talked to Martin about should we try to do a reimagination or reboot or whatever you call it of this game. Are we allowed to do so? It has a specific status within the sort of history of Nordic LARP, and do we dare to sort of poke at that? I mean, Martin of course said yes, of course we can do that. And we started to look at it and quickly realized that and a very interesting part was that we got Kronborg Exmoor Castle early October. And then, of course, we need to finalize what that meant. But they said, yes, you can come and we can do it here. So we had...
But you were talking about Kronborg before we even started to talk about Hamlet, which was the weird thing.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, what are we going to run in Elsinore? Oh, I wonder.
Yeah. So we also think, okay, you can get it in March. And we thought 10 weeks to design a game. That seems like extremely short time. But it was like, okay. Normally, when we have done big games, it taken like years or more, and we've figured out that we do not have time to do projects like that. But what if we could do this more efficiently, more smart, and use our experience to do it in 10 weeks? Is that possible? And Martin said, yes, of course it is. And I agreed, and the other in the crew agreed, and then we set out and built a website in 14 days, launched it, built a new website that was better and had more information. It is still not perfect, and this is an ongoing project and process. And of course, nothing is finalized yet, but we are trying to do this very fast and get information out and so on. So let's talk a little bit about the sort of design thing that we have done. So we're going to go through these 5 elements. We're going to talk about from old to new, about doing something that was done 13 years ago. Then we're going to talk a little bit about what Hamlet is in the play and how we are reading that. Then we're looking about the design elements we have, and what the big one is the interaction design between players. That's we're going to get Johanna from the team to talk about that, because that is the core part of the design. And then we're going to talk about, since we are in a castle that is 400 years old, there's a lot of restrictions to that location, and how that a LARP that was played in a bunker under Stockholm 13 years ago, and how it was designed to that location, that by changing that location it becomes a completely different thing because of a lot of stuff. That we're going to talk about that. But let's talk about old to new.
Yes. So Hamlet started as a request. It's the to my knowledge, one of the first requests from the active theatre world directly to the LARP world to make something that unites theatre and participation culture. And this was already in 2000 or 99 or something like that, where Riksteatern commissioned us to do a touring version of Hamlet. The basic character setup and the groups and the houses and the basic interpretation is still the same from this original version. That means that this game has been run 4 times in that format, which was a 6-hour, very intense format, only doing the second act from Hamlet, condensed. That one was written primarily by Daniel Krauklis, who made the big breakthrough in doing the adaptation for participation, which was looking not at the bourgeoisie psychological interpretation of Hamlet, but a Brechtian Marxist reading, where the fall of Hamlet's family becomes the fall of an entire noble class. And suddenly the court becomes playable, suddenly the conflict becomes something that doesn't only concern the people closest to Hamlet, but everybody. What is the undiscovered country of the future? what's the future of our fallen little house, and how will that break apart? And it's always been a group effort. So Holger Jakobsson wrote a lot of stuff. Mattias Gullbrandsson has written tons of it. Carl Heath produced. Anna Eriksson did a lot of stage direction and the solutions in the play. And the original version was produced by Anders Vendin, more known as Money Brother, for the Swedish people in the house. So that was a beautiful little project showcasing how LARPing can be done with absolute beginners. The second adaptation was just when we realized that we had material to do something completely different and much more intense. And that is the first time Hamlet became what has become sort of the legend of Hamlet. We played it under Vitabergsparken, which is a big park in Stockholm. It's the location where Bahnhof's servers, that's an internet service provider, now have all their servers. This was an old fire truck garage, which we could do basically anything in. And that gave us the opportunity to use tons of old propping from Riksteatern, and tons of clothes, and smoke wherever, and do whatever we wanted inside that enclosed space. And I think that shaped a lot of the design for the second run of Hamlet. And yeah, the same writers continue that one, refining the characters slightly. But I remember it as a glorious game. But now when I look back at the material, it's like, okay, here are the characters, we're just gonna send them out. No, we're not. Because they consist of 5 pages of fluff fiction text. It's like, oh, a beautiful little short story about the mood of the character. Oh, very useful, fantastic, thank you. So basically what we did, we looked at them and said, okay, the character concepts are fine, the relations between the groups are fine, the basic structure of the game is perfect, but we can't use a word of this material. It's just too long-winded and too bullshit. We might publish it at some time for you to look at, just how grotesquely long-winded it was the last time around. So that is, I think, is the major change that has changed from mood and like wishy-washy, strange, wordy descriptions to very concrete descriptions of what we want the game to be, rather than implying it in prose, which is the old 90s way of doing stuff. So I think it reflects perfectly sort of the transformation of LARP design culture.
Exactly. And that sort of was really interesting to take a look at that old giant and critically examine it and try to see, okay, which parts are actually working and which parts are completely outdated. Because if we did the exact same version, I think it would be a horrible game, because everybody has sort of gone through a lot of phases of different stuff. So, for example, now the characters are short, crisp, a lot about relations, there's stuff that you can actually do and so on. We'll talk a little bit more about characters later, but it has changed completely sort of the way that we want, which information we want to give out there. And a thing that we also have sort of been battling with is that the idea of the old game and what happened there is extremely difficult to not be put on top of whatever that we are communicating. So it seems like no matter what we're gonna communicate that this thing is gonna be, we will always have people who have a lot of ideas about how the old thing were, and that they're gonna put that into this box as well, and we are no control of that. No. And that is...
I think at some point we just accepted that we're sort of making the legend Hamlet rather than a concrete copy of it, or at least we're heavily influenced by the legend around it. Writers automatically gravitate to that style, and I think players come in with certain expectations, and there's like, our design is not the old design. But the old design never was the design of the myth either. Yeah. So, that we are resting on the shoulders of giants, and we have huge shoes to fill. But it's mostly, I think, it's us providing ample grounds for participants to live out their expectations. That's what's going to decide what this finally becomes.
Yes.
The design can cater for anything from like extremely intense, semi-abstract black box play. You could play it that way, it's perfectly fine, it's going to be a beautiful game, the setting is perfect for it. Or it can be played very, very physically and with a one-to-one parity of action and immersion and so on. And there's nothing in the design per se that does anything else that enable that range of play behaviors. That is what we're striving for. So it will be what you expect it to do.
Moving on.
Yes, sorry. Yeah, a few words about reading Shakespeare in this context. As I said, Marxist class reading, but also trying to get the text of the play into interesting parts of the system. Some characters are inspired by throwaway lines in the text, or characters that only appear very briefly. Other characters have been turned into whole houses. Other characters have been turned into functions in the game. But most importantly, we work with what we'd like to sloppily call some sort of geek intertextuality, which means that a lot of the groups are inspired not only by the core text of Hamlet, but by secondary texts that have been inspired by Shakespeare's noble tragedies. And of course, this is the stuff we live for and mainline a lot in pop culture. There would be no Game of Thrones without Shakespearean dramas, without the Shakespearean tragedy as a format. There would be no Dune without Shakespeare's noble tragedies. There would be no Elric of Melniboné without Shakespeare. All of these things owe a huge depth, or Sons of Anarchy for that matter. So we feed them back into the system, into groups inspired by those secondary sources to keep everything within a Shakespearean universe. We also use some characters from other Shakespeare plays, and in our fictitious 1939, a lot of the characters from the Shakespeare plays are there somewhere in the world. There's a court case going on in Italy towards a Jewish guy called Shylock. There's an island with a Thelemic monastery where Prospero rules, and so on. So all of these little details can be dispersed into the world.
Yeah.
But most of all, every character trying to be a reflection of Hamlet and the central core themes.
And of course, this is something that we have had immense joy of taking all this and putting into the box. But you as players do not need to read all of Shakespeare and a lot of literature around what this is about and so on, because as in any other world that is being built, what is happening within the physical space of the lab is the important part. Everything else is fluff, and whatever that the material you're going to get is not going to be like in the old thing where it's like 60 pages of text that you needed to know. It's going to be like maybe 2 pages of text, and then there's going to be additional material for those who want that, but it's not going to be a part of the thing that you have to remember who is where and why. It's much more important what is happening between two players right now. So the design caters for that. Everything else is sort of just us having fun. But yeah, cool. Elements of design. Yeah. Basically, we have a few big elements of the actual meat and bones of the design. We have the act structure. We have 3 acts instead of 5, and in those 3 acts we also have an escalation mechanic that makes sure that specific types of interactions cannot happen until later. So we'll have some sort of story arc because of that mechanic. Then we have sort of the big thing, which is the interaction design on how to opt in and opt out of situation. Johanna will talk about that afterwards, because that is like the biggest thing in this interaction machine. We see the way that we have designed this as a big machine, and all players and all information are put into this machine, and that generates interesting interactions, meetings between players and interesting situations. So we do not think that we should never be in control of what is happening, but we should generate something that makes the possibility of interesting interactions happen. So whatever you put into it will hopefully generate a lot of content. And we of course also have a lot of content that we're going to put into this machine to make it work. So let's talk a little bit about the 3 acts and themes. So we have 3 themes, which is decadence, deception, and death. In Hamlet, basically what it's about is people talking about murdering other people. So this is of course also a big part of inside Hamlet. The first act is based around decadence. Denmark is being overrun by revolutionaries. The Norwegian prince Fortinbras is in the lead of this revolution. They are coming. This is probably the end, but of course, everybody in the court denies that this will happen, and they continue whatever they have been doing. It's business as usual. It's a little bit like on Titanic when the ship was sinking. There were still people drinking and dancing until the end because that's what they have been doing all their lives. And just because that this is the end, they're not going to change that because then they're not what they are anymore. So this is sort of the first act, a dive into this sort of world. And the interesting part is that, of course, there's all these corrupted people that works in a world where the morality or the official ethics of the world is something completely different than what is actually happening. Because you can't have a decadent court without it being mirrored in something that is more morally pure. So
there can't be a fall without some high moral ground to fall from. That needs to be established.
So officially, nobody is, of course, say homosexual or uses cocaine or gossips, but just below the surface, this happens. Everybody does that. But it's like a great Mexican standoff that you would never reveal that, because if you did that, then somebody would reveal something about you.
Yeah, and everybody has these like non-okay secrets that they carry around, or secrets. It's okay to do it in court. If it comes outside, it could be terrible.
So you'll never say it to anybody's face, or if you do, there will be consequences, of course.
This is a constant in the play of Hamlet. It's like blaming people for their moral faults and saying that he is corrupt, he's fallen, he's a sick king, his blood is weak, and so on. These constant recriminations. That is one of the big conflict drivers in the play. It's conflicts about morality and telling somebody they're an awful, terrible person. That is one thing they want to enable within the design. And yes, it basically reflects Hamlet's view on Claudius Denmark, because Hamlet thinks that Claudius Denmark is terribly decadent, and in our version it absolutely is.
Yes. The second act, the theme is deception. Yeah. And that is because Hamlet has left the court, he's gone to England, and all the houses are sort of fighting about, some of them fighting about who's going to be the next king after Claudius. You need to have some sort of ready whatever is going to happen. Of course, a lot of people are worried about the revolution. Some continue to sort of deceive themselves that this is business as usual, and others are of course trying to do whatever it takes to position themselves in what the new world order probably will become. So there's a lot of sort of intriguing going on, and a lot of still, of course, the partying is going on, but there's navigating yourself within that deception. Where will your character move in this new world? The third act is, of course, the end. The theme is death. This is where the deadly duels happens. People are being murdered left and right, because, of course, during the deception and the decadence, your honor has been gravely wounded, and, of course, you will take revenge. This is about revenge. So, and in it, also, all characters are seen as, will live the Hamlet story, in a way. On a meta level, everybody is living the Hamlet story and seeing the world through those eyes, even though they're not playing the character Hamlet within the log, but they're going through sort of the same emotional arc.
The basic rules that this implies, this is similar to the rules that were used in Celestra. In the beginning, there will be no violent conflicts in the first act at all. In the second one, all threats and terrible things happen covertly. They're not out in the open. And in the last act, every single conflict between two or more people will result in the death of one or both or more of the parties involved in that conflict. Very simple. So steep escalation.
Sorry?
And if you're alive at the end.
And if you're alive at the end, when Fortinbras storms the castle, he will gather people and he will shoot at the crowd. And then you, as a player, will make a decision. And the decision is, has my character deserved to live? And if you think your character is pure, has not been a terrible human being, you will not fall. if you think your character is a terrible human being, you will die. So the decision is up to you.
And this is you as a player putting moral judgment on your character at the end. So if you survive until the end, that is the privilege you will have to doom or save your own character based on your morality, not your characters or the worlds or anything like
that. To sort of build upon that everybody is Hamlet thing, we have a mechanic that was also used in the previous runs, which is the soliloquies. And soliloquies in theater terms is a speech that a character speaks that only the character can hear, but of course everybody in the audience are in the mind of that character. So
the way we did it the last time, we're probably going to do it quite similarly, is that we have a controlled space, which is a castle or a bunker or whatever, and when soliloquies roll around, we quietly dim lights or do a spotlight or play a specific theme and a specific bell, and that means that you go down in energy in your play gradually until the song is over, so you slow down and you suddenly start disengaging for conversations and fall silent and freeze. And slowly gather so you can see the central soliloquy space, the soliloquy is played out, that you internalize as something that's happening with your character. It's the agonizing choice that's inside at this moment. So transpose your current conflicts in the character to the text. And then as the bell rings again, it slowly starts rolling again with the input from the soliloquy coloring the next interactions that you do. So that is how we do it. We put it in as little maybe drops of color in a water glass that spread out and then dissipate. And doing that not too many times, not overusing it, but a few times to sort of give interesting food for thought. That's how we use the soliloquies.
Yeah. This of course also is reflected in the characters, and they are structured in a way that there's of course a description of the character. Then there is one line that defines the character, which is the reason why this character is a terrible human being is, and then an example could be that cannot see past his own faults, or everything that she does ends in rage, something like that, and that is sort of one of the core faults in that character. Then we have some relations to other characters, and most of the interesting parts of the character is within the relations. The relations explains a lot about how your character behaves in real life. Then we have the to-bes and not-to-bes. All characters have suggestions of actions or goals that they want to achieve. The to-bes are sort of constructive things that will redeem your character in some way, and the not-to-bes are destructive stuff that will send you on a spiraling death ride, basically. So you can choose to use these or not. That is up to you.
And I think the way that Hamlet uses his to-bes and not-to-bes, and I think the way that we all sort of actually do, is that we alternate. We don't only do like creative and positive things, we do self-destructive things as well. And wavering between them, and saying like one good and one bad and so on. That is a really fun mechanic they want to explore. So you don't go on a straight dramatic line with a character. You are wavering, and you are making decisions too late, and shit blows up in your face. That is the meaning of this. It's not this three-act, I'll do first this and that. But
Yeah. Just
in
like
a good way.
Hamlet
So you
in the story, right?
you do many different things. It doesn't mean inaction. It means inconsequential action. It means like two-sided action. It means contradicting yourself, being a hypocrite, choosing different things in different social environments, and so on. That's the important part of being and not being, and doing them both.
And the final element of the character is that since we are in a decadent court, everybody has vices.
Yep.
Vices are things that it could be addiction, it could be megalomania, it could be sadism, it could be something that defines your character. All characters have several of these. Most of the characters also will have a random or several random vices that you decide, and we have a mechanic on how to decide those vices.
And the vices are not things that we as writers think are bad. It's things that in Hamlet society are viewed as bad. very important distinction.
Yeah.
So they're not inherently destructive or anything like that. It's just
Some of them are.
some of them are, of course, some of them absolutely are. Some of them are hyper-destructive. But it does depend on your point of view. I mean, there is nothing good or bad, but thinking makes it so. It's a line from Hamlet that sort of inspired us to do devices in this way. We're not telling you what is good or bad for a character. We're telling you what the society thinks is good or bad for a character.
Yes. Now, the most important part of the design is how to opt in and opt out of interactions within the thing, and Johanna will talk about that.
Yes.
Well, nice picture of me dying.
Yes.
In Hamlet. Overdosing. Hi. I have a terrible headache that may be related to lack of sleep, and I'm really sorry if I'm incoherent. Then you should ask again. I'm also sorry. I'm not hiding in the darkness. It's just that I need somewhere to rest the computer. Okay. So this is where we are now. What I'm going to say now isn't finished, but as we heard, this is a 10-week design process, so it's happening pretty fast. This hasn't been tested, so it might still change. And what I'm going to talk about is what in our community historically we have called the safety system. That's a bad term because it implies that there's some kind of danger present. We don't think in this case that there is. So I noticed it said interaction design there. What is it that these kinds of interaction mechanisms that we're designing to be able to control what we loosely call safety, right? So I made this headline, which is opt-in, opt-out based ritual language system to enable play. Needs a little work. But yeah, so and also if somebody was in my safety lecture the other day, you heard this part before. All participation safety needs to be understood at 3 levels at the same time when we're thinking of, and when we're designing it, we need to think of at least 3 things at the same time. Themes, intensity, and simulation level. And you're often making choices between these things when you're designing LARPs, especially LARPs with so-called heavy content, and there are trade-offs between these. Now, for Hamlet, we've decided that Hamlet will have a very low simulation level. This means that the character's actions and the player's actions, like the things that the bodies are physically doing in the space, are very close, almost identical. That means that we can't really, since we've made this aesthetic choice, we can't really we're not going to have a big fighting mechanic, and we're not going to have a big sex mechanic or anything like that, so we can't work with the simulation level lever. The themes are also set by the play, so we have things like power and violence and decadence and sexuality that are sort of decided by the reading of Hamlet and about what this game is thematically trying to do. So there's very little we can do with those except make really sure that all the players know that this is what this is about, and then you can choose to still come when you know this. And if you have made the choice to come, then we only have really the intensity gauge to work with. So we put a lot of thought in how do we enable the players to negotiate intensity during play in different ways. And by the way, I think like for some people playing on this topic like sexuality or violence for some people they're not dangerous inherently. It's nothing specifically wrong with playing those kinds of topics, but the good thing to remember about those kinds of things is that different players think very differently, to react very differently to this. So to enable different players to play together, that's why we need this negotiation. The basic principle, which is everywhere on the website, is what happens in Elsinore stays in Elsinore. And actually this is part of the design. We haven't exactly translated that into what it means, but it means things that there's going to be a photo policy and there are going to be some rules about not talking about specifics of the content of the game after the game. This has 2 design functions. One is to strengthen the alibi, to make it feel safe to explore things inside the LARP so that you don't have to face them afterwards at your job or something like that. The other is to remove bragging rights. Because if you don't get to brag about this cool, awesome thing that you did at the LARP afterwards, then that takes away some of the really shit motivation for making bad choices inside the LARP. There are some continuous mechanisms happening through the play for opting in and opting out, and basically there's 3 of these. They are a little theatrical. This is intentional. It's to suit the aesthetic of the LARP. but they are also non-intrusive in the way that even though they are very visible or audible in this case, they are integrated into the culture of the court. This really is how these characters are speaking to each other. And this also comes from Shakespeare, right? Because nobody does anything in Shakespeare without talking about it for like 10 minutes while they're performing the action. So the first principle is requesting or describing actions before they happen. So especially if you can, the best way to do is, of course, is to invite actions, to say like, kiss me, or take my hand, or, you know, fight me. Then you are inviting the action, and the other person can make a choice about whether to do this or not. Where we're a little bit unclear still is, how do you, let's say that I'm playing a servant in your house, and I wouldn't mind this person like playing some kind of like threatening situation. How do I get them to initiate it? Because it's a little weird if I want to play on like being oppressed and I'm like, grab my ass, so that I can be offended by it. Like that's so that there it doesn't. So currently we're testing a version where you can also say where you can brag, you know, and you can say, well, I'm gonna kiss your neck, I'm gonna put my hand on your thigh, and then you do it, unless the other person says, I don't think so. In which case, you know, which you can, in the context of LARP, that there are completely reasonable responses. I don't think so, and then you just don't do it, you know. And that's of course an off-game information, but it's also an in-game information. But this needs testing. We'll see if it works. Probably you can also, if you get a question, if somebody initiates something, you can also put up the stop hand or move away physically, depending on what feels most natural at the time. We have to test if all of these three should be there in parallel. The second. So the first one was requesting or describing actions before they happen. The second is escalation and de-escalation language. These are phrases that it's like slang that is used inside the world when people talk to each other in conflicts. At any time, either party in a conflict can ask the question, is that all you've got? And the answer is, if you don't want to escalate, if you don't want the intensity to continue, or if you want to keep it at the same level, you can say, it's all you're going to get. Is that all you've got? It's all you're gonna get. Or you can leave the situation, you know, there are other, or if you feel that you can do more, you just don't respond to it. I mean, good to make eye contact so the other person knows you noticed the question. You can say, I've got plenty more. You know, you can use language creatively. We're not making any Shakespeare. This is ordinary, everyday language so that it's easy to play. If you're freaking out and you don't remember what to say, you can always tap out. Stop, break, back off. This means I don't want any more of this. 2 taps, 2 taps. But the language is cool, like you can play with the language, right? And you can say it in many different ways. The third mechanism is, we're calling it the silent soliloquy. This is, it's a mechanism for checking in with the character and the player at the same time. It goes like this. At any time in the game, any player can ask the question, even when they're alone, you can actually do this, but especially if you're in a group situation, of course. You can ask the question, what have I done? Or what have we done? Of course, now in a big tragedy, stopping every once in a while, asking the question, what have I done? You know, is meaningful to do. But this is a meta technique. It's just that it's a kind of non-intrusive meta technique. When you say, what have we done? Everybody takes a few seconds. Everybody sort of stops what they're doing for a few seconds. You essentially freeze. And the player steps, you check in with yourself. Okay, where am I on my journey with this character? Am I in a good place? Was this enough? Do I want to continue with what's happening right here? Or do I want to leave? And you know, that's a conversation between you and the character. Maybe it's reasonable for your character to extract themselves. Maybe it's reasonable for you as the player to extract yourself from this. Nobody's going to ask. And when somebody has invoked, what have we done? It's also because if you're doing something really terrible and somebody asks, what have we done? Then you can all be like, ooh, we're doing something really terrible. I mean, you can also revel in your own disgustingness, you know. And then you can choose to leave. So never hold anyone physically. Like if you're holding someone physically and somebody asks, what have we done? Let them go, right? So that they can leave if they want to. And in Hamlet, thematically, Hamlet is very much about initiating actions and then not finishing them. So this makes sense also in the context of the fiction. You can start something really intense and then you just walk away because you're wavering, right? Now, in LARPs, often it's difficult to because it doesn't make sense for the participant. Like, okay, but I'm playing like a really evil character and this really evil shit is going on. Maybe I should participate in this sadistic orgy over here. Or I'm just making up a random example. But in this, we've made a little hack where inside the culture, it's always okay, in-game, it's always okay to opt out of a situation, also for the character. And this can be motivated in approximately 3 different things. Either your character is so depraved and so decadent and such a terrible person that this horrifying thing that's going on here is so last year. Very boring. You know, we all did that when we were younger, but this whole sadistic torture thing is really like, it's very passé. You know, you're just bored by it. The other approach that you can take is that you're such an elitist that it's very banal to do this thing. Like, you can judge people aesthetically on like their choices of decadence. So you can be like, well, you know, again, like, it's so last year, that's very boring. And you don't need to verbalize it, you can just choose to not participate, but for the character it can make sense. Now the third way, of course, if you happen to have a very good character, which I don't know, is statistically unlikely, but if you're playing somebody...
Hey, there's one Horatio to every 10 others.
Yeah, so some of you might, if you're coming to this LARP, maybe playing good characters. You can take the moral high ground, of course, and also walk away for that reason. Sometimes you may want to signal in a situation why you're making the choice, but there's no real reason. Everybody is a really sort of overbearing asshole in this game, so you can just behave like an asshole and just walk off, or just ignore people, and that's a valid strategy for playing. Then the active breaks, of course, automatically offer some perspective to the players. So you are forced out of your role, so you have to think a little bit about what's going on, and that's a good thing if you're going on some kind of trip. We are taking you out of it a little bit to shake you up, so you can think about it before you go back in. On the other hand, there is an escalation structure, so that probably takes each other out from a sort of safety perspective. And I'm guessing, we don't know for the venues for sure, but most probably there will also be an off-game room just so you can go out and take a breather if you need to. That's where we are with the interaction design right now. I think we might, I don't know exactly how we're going to do this. Maybe if we publish some instructions, and put them in places that if people want to test this in different environments, we'd be very welcome. I mean, we would welcome people to test it and give us a lot of feedback of whether this works or not. Yeah. Everything would be workshopped, of course, before the LARP, otherwise it's not going to work. Yeah, that's where we are with this.
Can I have a question?
Yes.
Yes.
Just a quick one, because you talked about escalation, de-escalation, and you didn't mention any. You talked about the escalation and the verbal thing you can do there, but you didn't mention for the de-escalation if you could say something to de-escalate.
To stay in the situation but de-escalate.
Yeah. Just tone it down.
We haven't decided on the specific language, but we think it's going to be. But it's important that the total number of phrases that you need to learn should be approximately no more than 5. Yeah.
And also, I mean, if you don't respond with the I have plenty more or so on, you are implicitly de-escalating or keeping on the level. By not escalating, you're keeping on the level.
And you're also,
and of course there's always the tap out.
Yeah, and you can tap, or you can do what have I done? Because also, even if I'm being tortured, I can ask the question. I mean, I don't know why torture comes up as an example. It's probably not going to be any kind of torture in this game, but it's a very clear power dynamic. But then I can always ask, what have I done? As in, what have I done to deserve this? Like, so there's always an in-game reason to ask a question, no matter what position you're in. Yeah. Nice.
What?
The final thing we're going to talk about is that being on Kronborg Castle, there's a lot of restrictions of design. It's not a black box where you can do whatever you want. There is hundreds of pages of text of what is allowed at that place. Literally hundreds of pages. For example, the emergency exit signs hangs from the ceiling and not from the walls, because you cannot put stuff on the walls unless that it's one of the original things or from before that level of carefulness that you need to take on the place was done. So in one wall there's a screw from the 30s. You can use that screw because it was put up since the rules for that thing was made in the 60s, and all sorts of stuff. No candles, no smoking. Specific types of light bulbs cannot be used at the venue. So there's a lot of restrictions. Of course, there's the room restrictions. Fortunately, the guy running the castle, and he's been doing that for 33 years, said, I will do whatever I can, and my crew will do whatever we can to make sure that you will get what you want. But I need to follow these rules, and the fire safety rules are of course very strict, and completely does not correlate with how the castle is built. So the doors open inwards instead of outwards, even though that's illegal. They cannot change it because of other laws and so on. So it's a constant negotiation, and we are getting to know these people, and they are beginning to trust that we can actually do this. We have done a lot of professional events in venues that have same rule sets, different places in Europe and in the US. So they are of course also learning. And then they of course have some sort, since it's also a museum, there's some guards that needs to be present in some capacity. We are very lucky that one of the guards is also a LARPer, and so he's gonna of course also negotiate this thing from the inside, so they will learn the language, what is happening. Because if two people picks up swords and start fighting, that's not normal in a museum, and are they doing it for real or not, and so on. So there's a schooling process going on there as well. But we'll have much more information about that because this is a constant negotiation. We're going to figure out that as we come along. It's just a reminder to you that some of the things that when they tell us a restriction, then we cannot LARP in this room in the way that we want to. And the next step for us is of course to say, okay, how can we design a LARP where even with this restriction it is possible to get to where we want to get. So it is extremely frustrating and extremely rewarding to work in this way. And they're very happy, and we are very happy still, so hopefully it will all work out. But it's very different from working in, say, a black box or a setting that you control completely, have rented, and you know there's not going to be strangers there. So, for example, on Friday during the first act, we start somewhere after lunch. The castle is open to the public until 3, so we'll be in specific places of the castle where they do not have access, so we don't have access to the courtyard until after they have left. Stuff like that. So there's constant little negotiation going on. So we have a very open mind about this, and like trying to see how can we do this, and we hope also that we can in some way inform all the participants that this is a little bit different than it is usual. So,
and also, I mean, that's a lot about the restrictions, but on the positive side, it is a space that is Elsinore. We don't just need to say anything more about that. Also, it holds a wide variety of spaces. It's huge, and we're quite certain that we have exactly the kinds of spaces we want, which means that we can have not one single space that we try to redecorate for every act, but we can actually move spaces within the castle to match perfectly with theme and act. And that is a huge benefit, and something like dissimilar in spatial design to anything that I've ever worked with before. And that's a huge plus, which makes these restrictions easily worth paying for me at least.
Yeah, and also on a sort of a time level that it was the Hamlet was written for this specific castle. The first cast of Hamlet went to Denmark to inspect the castle. Shakespeare didn't go with them. There's been performed Hamlet the play there for 160 years. So the castle of course also, it's part of their culture that stuff like this happens. This is a little bit different for them, but still they're very open and they're very generous and so on. So
if the space was good enough for Shakespeare, I think it's good enough for us.
Cecilia?
Yes, I think we're going into questions mode, right?
As a team, that we're actually saying the things about. We learned when Martin and I were part of the semester team, we had the same issues about the place. They were constantly giving us new stuff, new information. That's what we have decided, that we are now open, saying that some stuff will actually be solved 1 or day 2 before the LARP begins. But they are so kind, they are so helpful, and it's an amazing place. We have actually been underneath a part of the castle, and we have touched the walls that are several hundred years old.
Yeah, it's from the 800s, when the historical Hamlet.
So I just want to say, for you individuals who like high heels when you party, take a pair of another shoes with you. Because I don't want to take care of broken wrists. Please.
Cool.
Yes. So one more thing. Yeah, we have to. We're gonna have to wrap.
Yep. There's a special Knudepunkt ticket price for the first one, where we still have a little less than 20 tickets left, so it's 65 euros off right now. So you can still buy a ticket and participate, and there's still great characters left. Great characters.
There are no really bad characters.
No. They are all amazing.
Yes. And yes, take the opportunity. It's only going to be 4 Knutepunkt. The first game is super interesting, casting-wise, in a lot of ways, because we have a lot of people from other scenes, theater scenes, and so on, and we're spectacularly happy with an international interest around the project, also from people who are Shakespeare fans and Shakespeare scholars or culture journalists and so on. So this is on the radar, and you will play with new, fresh, wonderful blood that you can spill to your heart's content. Cool. So yes, we hope you will join us.
We do not have time for questions, but Martin and I will be right out here,
Yeah.
so you can ask us questions there.
Please bombard us. Also, you can ask us on Twitter or whatever.
Twitter
Or you can Twitter us, or
Yes.
you can ask us on Facebook, or send us a mail, and we'll answer when we get back to it. So, thank you.